Okay. Good morning, everybody. I am so excited about this venue here. I'm Megan Coyle-Wright. I'm one of the interventional cardiologists. Literally, come have a seat at the table. Really, we've got 3 seats up here. We have some seats in the middle. I know some of you are clinical and you'll get called away. That's okay. We understand that, but come have a seat at the table. That's why we chose this room. And then when we fill the seats, then have a seat at the back table, I guess. Have some breakfast. Welcome to everyone who's joining us from Memphis. We're excited to have you. And I'm going to start off with introducing Liz Appling. So come up and join me. Liz Appling is our Chief Diversity Officer. She's been working in this role for 18 years and really has been the vision from the very beginning for diversity at Erlanger. And I'd like her to say a few words before we introduce Dr. Panda to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Cole-Wright. And thank you all for being here this morning. I know we're going to have a very interesting day, and I'll get some great information. As a diversity officer, I am committed to promoting awareness and engaging staff around DEI. And we also, I don't know if anyone's here from our diversity council. If you're here from the diversity council, would you raise your hand? I was hoping we had some representatives. We do. Yay. But a diversity, equity, and inclusion council has been developed here at Erlanger. And one of the things that I heard this morning is having that voice at the table, taking that information back to the staff is very important. And identifying champions of diversity. And I know that I have a lot of champions around the room this morning that will help us with this message and take it back today. But thank you again for being here this morning. I'm not going to say a lot because I know we want to hear from our speaker today. And thank you, Dr. Cole-Wright. And I have to say, Dr. Cole-Wright is that champion for diversity. And not only does she walk the walk, but when she talks it, I mean, she really puts it in action. So thank you for bringing our speaker here this morning.
Thank you, Liz. And tonight we're going to have dinner at 6:30 at the 618 restaurant. All are invited. And Liz is helping to lead that event to talk about how to engage the community in our diversity efforts. So we'd love to have you join us. I'd like to have Dr. Mukta Panda come up to introduce our speaker. Dr. Panda is professor of medicine and really leads the charge for well-being at our hospital. And I have to say, I came here just 2 years ago, just had my 2-year anniversary, and meeting Dr. Panda really did give me a sense of belonging here, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you for your leadership.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. What a treat, right? Let's give Dr. Cole-Wright a round of applause for putting this together. And of course, Ms. Appling for all her work. So you really are in for a treat. I got to meet Dr. Golano just for a brief time, and I found a kindred spirit. And I think what she is going to be speaking about is going to resonate a lot with who we are today at UT College of Medicine, Chattanooga, and the Erlanger Health System, what our strategic plan is aiming for, what is our vision and mission as we try to build this culture of inclusion and belonging. So thank you, Dr. Golano, for being here. Her CV and her profile is extensive. I did Google her because that's what we do these days. I didn't chat GPT you, but I did do that, Googling. I won't be able to spend a lot of time on introduction because I know you want to hear from her. But she has also has an MBA and is a clinical associate professor in the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine and the Associate Vice Chair for Diversity, Equity, and Well-Being for the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Michigan. She serves as the Associate Section Chief of Cardiology at the Lieutenant Charles S. Kettles VA Ann Arbor Health System. She was recently selected to participate in the prestigious Rudy Ann Basher Women in Academic Medicine Leadership Scholars Program. And I did Google that, and that indeed is an extremely competitive and a really well structured program that I think really trains women and promotes women leadership. So congratulations. Her clinical interests are coronary and structural heart disease with a focus on regional care for the veteran population. Outside the cath lab, Her administrative and academic interests include gender equity in medicine and physician well-being, and their relationship to the clinical enterprise at an academic medical center. In her own words, she stated this morning that she likes to be a champion for women's rights. So thank you for that. And I think we all know that in order to really create a culture of professional fulfillment and well-being, beyond the moral and ethical or even business argument, we really need to promote a sense where we all feel that we can belong. I'll leave you with this. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice. Belonging is having that voice heard. So I think, thank you, Dr. Golano, for helping us move forward with that. And I'd also like to say a welcome to our colleagues who are joining us from Memphis. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Panda, for those kind words. Let me. All right. Adjust this real quick. Perfect. So I have the pleasure of speaking today about our journey on thinking differently about faculty recruitment. And I want to emphasize this is a journey. This is something we've been talking about at University of Michigan for a couple of years. But we understand that this is something that will extend for many, many years to come. And I'm excited to share kind of some of our thoughts and the progress that we've made, and really eager to hear your kind of response to this kind of new idea of what we've been doing, whether this could be something applicable to UT Chattanooga. So hopefully we can have time for some questions and comments at the end. So the objectives for today, by the end, I hope you understand the rationale for a diverse workforce and can understand some of the barriers for achieving diversity in the workplace, and to be able to talk a little bit more in depth about some strategies that we may employ to change recruitment paradigms. I don't have any relevant disclosures, but obviously as a white, cis woman, female interventional cardiologist, I have my own biases and just need to acknowledge that, as I give this talk. So I don't know how many of you are involved with recruitment, and whether it's for faculty recruitment, residents, fellows, et cetera, but whether this is a specific conversation or just kind of threads that we've heard in the past about recruitment, we kind of hear the same things about what people say when talking about who we may want to join us in our programs or at our institutions. A lot of times the conversations start like this. My friend from residency says this candidate is fabulous, right? Somebody may know somebody. This person has an amazing pedigree. We're talking about people, not thoroughbred horses, right? This person would be a great fit for our institution. Like, what does that even really mean? And maybe more relevant in Ann Arbor, he is a Michigan man, right? So this is kind of a joke. In University of Michigan, it's really more related to the football team. And our previous coach, Bo Schembechler, would talk about what it means to be a Michigan man. But I've actually heard this in conversations about faculty recruitment. So it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. But what's the problem with having conversations about recruitment in this fashion? It's led to kind of the same types of people being recruited over time. And so unless we're willing to think differently about these ways that we bring people into an institution, nothing is going to change. And why does this matter? Having a diverse workforce has real implications for us as healthcare providers. We know from multiple studies that if there's concordance from either a race or gender standpoint, there are actually impacts on patient outcomes. And whether it's the likelihood of Black men in Oakland receiving flu vaccine, Black men being given ICDs for appropriate indications, women being treated differently for myocardial infarctions. Like these are real clinical impacts that having concordance in who we are has on our patient population. So if there's no other reason why this is important, it's us as healthcare providers owe it to our patients to have equity in care. And these are just some of the kind of more visible ways that having a diverse workforce has impacts. There are a lot of other ways that we are diverse that are less visible. So I would offer, for example, most of my clinical work is at the VA hospital. And I know that my colleagues that work along with me have a lot of dedication and care for the veterans. But my dad is a Marine Corps vet. And I know that my interaction with my patients is just different because of my own experiences through my dad and seeing his experience with PTSD and kind of knowing about his experience as a veteran. That's not to say that my colleagues aren't trying and don't put all their effort into their care, but my relationship with my veteran patients is just different. So, and then why else does this matter? The reality is, if you look at US Census data, more and more our minority populations are going to be larger proportions of who we care for. And over time, this is only going to be a more important, consideration. And the downside is that even though minority populations are growing in the United States, we haven't really seen that same impact on who is actually providing the care. We've had pretty much stagnation in the fact that most of our healthcare providers are white over the past, several decades. And this is data from the AAMC from 2018. It may as well be data from 2022 or 23, that most of the faculty at medical schools are white, followed by those who identify as Asian, with all the other minorities being underrepresented compared to the US population. And so thinking about the systems that we use, I would offer that all those people that make those comments about Michigan man, pedigree and thoroughbred and all that, I think that they have good intentions, right? But the systems that we're using to recruit is the problem. And every system, this is like the famous quote from Edward Deming, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. If you continue to use the same system and the same method of thinking, you're going to have the same outcome over and over. And, to put it a little bit more casually, with supposedly a quote, attributed to Einstein, that the definition of insanity is repeating the same mistakes over and over and expecting different results. So we have to really think about the system that we use to recruit to actually think that we're going to make an impact. So let's look at some of the numbers. I think these are pretty sobering. So I'm going to focus on cardiology a lot just because that's my subspecialty, but I think this is representative of many other specialties within medicine. So if you look at these first two columns here, this is the proportion of people in that are either men or women in the US population. And as you kind of go down, representation in medical school, representation in residency, fellowship, and then practicing cardiologists. And we're actually pretty close to parity up to medical school, right? Almost 50% of medical students now are women. Internal medicine actually gets pretty close to that parity, but you see a significant drop off once you get to cardiology fellowships. So there's a problem here. Like, why is there such a huge gap in the percentage of women wanting to be cardiologists? This makes me super sad as an interventional cardiologist that only 9.8% of our current fellows are women. That's a huge problem. We're missing out on a gigantic group of people who are exceptional candidates. We need to do better at being inclusive. And then similarly for practicing cardiologists, that number doesn't break 20%. So there's a real issue here. And then similarly, if you look at race and ethnicity, you see, the kind of the same trends, that looking at the US population, kind of breaking things down into white population, Asian population, and then all others are kind of grouped in this data set into underrepresented minority folks, that you see a similar kind of drop off here once you get to medical school of representation, that if 31.9% of the population is underrepresented, that half of that is what we see in medical school. And the numbers as you go down into cardiology are equally dismal. So if we're not able to recruit these folks into our groups, whether it's residency, fellowship, clinical practice, we're missing out on a ton of talent. And so you may be familiar with Dr. Capers. He's kind of a pretty outspoken voice in the cardiology community about diversity. And this was a recent editorial in the New England Journal. And basically the gist of this is, we know this is a problem. We have to actually take action to make an impact. That, study after study describing the problem is great, but where do we go from here? We need to do something dramatic to change. So at the University of Michigan, a couple of years ago in 2019, our previous department chair, John Carruthers, decided to make the investment in our office, which I'll describe in a second. and really begin changing things in earnest. And so the office was formed. We have a nice sized budget. He provided the kind of pull, if you will, the push and the pull to have leadership accountability for maintaining these kinds of values and ideals, and also incentivized our division chiefs to kind of work towards these values and ideals. So, to the extent that he's got the power and the levers to influence how we're thinking about recruitment, he's done so. Dr. Crothers is now at University of California, San Diego. Our interim chief, Ray Young, also very committed to our program. We expect, our future department chair, whoever that may be down the road, would be held to the same standard in terms of funding and accountability. So our office is the Office of DE&I and Wellbeing. And, when we started the office, we had a hard time kind of separating these two. How can you have a sense of well-being if you don't feel included and welcome in a space? And there was so much overlap between the two initiatives that we decided to kind of roll them into one. And so our office's vision is that our Department of Internal Medicine will be a diverse and inclusive community that provides each person with the opportunities and the support that they need to thrive. And our mission is to cultivate an environment that empowers our faculty, learners, and staff to fulfill their purpose and potential. And even though I'm talking mostly about faculty recruitment today, we have similar initiatives targeting our staff. And I don't want to, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that they are a very large component of what our office is focused on and committed to. Our team, our vice chair is Michael Lakella. I am the associate vice chair. We have just an exceptional human being, Erin Price, as our senior program manager, and Gretchen O'Hare joined our office about a year ago. And we're kind of like the core group that has kind of led the strategic plan for the office. But the other component of what our group does is the Empower Council. And I know Empower is not spelled correctly, but it's supposed to be like internal medicine, with our cute little attempt at branding. But our Empower Council is essentially a faculty and a staff representative from each of the 13 divisions in the Department of Internal Medicine, and as well as 2 representatives from the VA hospital, just because there are some faculty that just practice at the VA, and there's some nuances to being a VA faculty. So we wanted to make sure that they had a representation and a voice at the table about those kind of specifics. So we meet on a monthly basis, faculty and staff combined, and it really has provided a rich environment for very candid and open conversations. It's a very non-judgmental group, and have really been able to use the council to shape some of our initiatives, and also use it as a method to kind of improve communication. And whether that's kind of from the grassroots up, that kind of the council can be a filter to leadership in the department, to make sure that they are more aware of what's actually happening, because our department is so big. We've got 900 faculty and almost 2,000 staff. So some voices can get lost in the shuffle. And so the council kind of serves to amplify those voices. But similarly, it's very hard sometimes for us to communicate some of our strategic planning and some of our initiatives down to the boots on the ground faculty and staff. And so we really kind of value this council as a method of bidirectional communication. Currently, kind of some of our current strategic priorities, again, thinking about how we can create an inclusive environment. We're really focused on career development, especially staff career development. There are some challenges with the way our HR department is organized at the University of Michigan, kind of even main campus. And so we're trying to work around that to provide better career development for our staff. We really are thinking closely about how can we improve faculty and staff interactions. And then the kind of 2 programs that we've worked on the most in depth kind of from the beginning is this holistic faculty recruitment, and then also a complete rethink of how we have vacation coverage and implementation. So why does DE&I matter, and what does this mean? Just so that we're all kind of thinking about this from the same perspective. Diversity is basically the ways in which we're all different, and whether that's race or ethnicity, gender or gender identity, ability, previous culture, lived experiences, veteran status, like you name it, it's broad. It's not meant to just be race or gender. What does equity mean? Equity is just the acknowledgement that each person comes from different circumstances, and we each may need a slightly different set of tools to achieve an equal outcome, and being mindful of that and being respectful of that. And inclusion is obviously like creating an environment where we all have a sense of belonging, that we can see ourselves, at least in my situation, that University of Michigan and the Department of Internal Medicine is a place where we feel like we belong and that we can thrive and be successful. DE&I does not mean that we sacrifice quality or excellence, and DE&I definitely does not mean that we have to have the same beliefs. Why are we interested in doing this? I made the case, the kind of medical healthcare, health equity rationale for this, but there's actually, reasons beyond the kind of moral imperative to think about diversity. It is, a way that we can create strong communities. You'll feel more valued. You're more likely to stay at your current job. There'll be less turnover. There are some kind of business related metrics to support the goal of DE&I in our workplace. One of the kind of advantages that we have at University of Michigan is that about half mile down the road is the Ross School of Business. And there are a lot of kind of thought leaders at the Ross School of Business thinking about this from a much more broad perspective. So this isn't just a healthcare issue. This is really a global workforce question. And beyond healthcare, we know that there are multiple studies that show that a diverse workforce actually have better outcomes. If you think about it, when you're investing your money for retirement, you don't just invest in one stock, right? You have a diverse portfolio because you'll have a better return on your investment in the long run. So this is a similar kind of concept. So Scott Page is one of the professors at the business school, and he's done a lot of the writing on this. He's got a great TED talk on YouTube. If you're interested, it's not too long, and it kind of boils down this sometimes dry book into like a few minutes that are kind of a little bit more digestible. But essentially from a data science perspective, he's demonstrated that when problems are hard and multidimensional, they're better addressed by cognitively diverse groups of people. And I would say healthcare is just full of situations like this, right? And so we are going to be better able to handle the challenges that we face, whether it's, the care that we're providing, the, innovation and the research that we're thinking about, in multiple different facets. We're better off if we have a diverse workforce. One of the other reasons why we're interested in thinking about this from a faculty perspective is there's definitely a lot of kind of feedback in terms of who our faculty are. So obviously our faculty work very closely with our medical students. The more a medical student can see themselves as, one of the faculty, the more likely they are to stay, the more likely they are to feel that Michigan is maybe their home. Medical students are frequently become our internal medicine residents. Our proportion of University of Michigan medical students in our medical residency program is pretty significant. And similarly, our residents become our fellows. And right now, about 70% of the people that we hire in the Division of Cardiology are from our current fellowship program. And so, having a diverse faculty influences each kind of phase of this life cycle, if you will. And so again, even though I'm talking about the faculty specifically, it has a cascading kind of spillover effect into these other groups. And certainly the other groups as well, I think, from the medical school admissions, residency programs, et cetera, are also kind of having parallel questions and comments about how can we think a little bit differently about the workforce. So on campus, one of the leading groups has been the Department of Surgery, and you can access from external to the University of Michigan, their website. It's kind of worth taking a look at if this is something that you're interested in. But a couple of years ago, they started the Michigan Promise, which was a program that was basically an investment in the faculty and residents to make their career lives better. There was kind of like a fairly decent sized faculty exodus that I think was the trigger. And it was finally a wake up call that, we needed to think differently about who we were in the Department of Surgery. And so they've really focused on multiple different phases of a career life cycle to make some impacts. And some of what we've done in the Department of Medicine has been to adapt some of the work in the Department of Surgery. Although, there's certain nuances, that are different between the two groups. So we tried to, in the Department of Medicine, break down kind of the process, that system of how we recruit, thinking about this from a kind of workflow perspective instead of just an anecdote perspective and how we recruit. So thinking differently about how we post the opportunities and describe the positions that are available. How do we advertise when these positions are available? I mean, in the past, they frequently weren't even happening. Nobody, unless you had a personal connection, no one knew that that there was even an opportunity there. How do we review applications to these open positions? How do we interview? This interviewing process has probably been the most labor intensive part of how we've rethought faculty selection. Then how, after we've interviewed people, do we select and rank candidates? And then thinking about how we track results. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail into some of these items. So as I said, in the past, many of these positions that were open weren't even really publicly posted. And so it's only reasonable to think that, like, unless you know somebody at University of Michigan, you're not going to know to apply for a job in infectious disease or endocrinology. We've rethought how we describe a position. Instead of being very dry and saying, we need another echocardiographer, we like to talk a little bit more personally about what the goals and the life experience is like in the division of cardiology. And be very explicit in that. I think one of the most important things is that as soon as a candidate sees a job description, for them to understand right away, oh, this is where the University of Michigan is going. And they can easily then decide for themselves, like, oh, this sounds like a place I want to be, or you know what, I don't really care for that as kind of my career goal. Maybe that's not where I need to be. We always want to use inclusive and non-discriminatory language. And we've incorporated the Michigan Medicine and Department of Internal Medicine's commitment to DE&I and well-being as part of the job description. As part of the application, we may inquire about candidates' previous experiences with DE&I. And then we've used some non-traditional media to broadcast these opportunities. So not just relying on, say, job postings in the New England Journal of Medicine or Circulation or JACC, if you're talking about a cardiology position, but like using Twitter. I mean, I know Twitter has its own problems. And for some of my more senior colleagues, they maybe were a little bit skeptical, but the reality is that a lot of the younger faculty applicants, especially people just coming out of training, like Twitter is a major way that they are communicating like what their interests are and really kind of what they may be looking for. And then we've tried our best to capture better demographic info. This is all obviously voluntary, but it's been part of our goal to better track our results. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So this is kind of what the Division of Hospital Medicine has done. And they were really kind of our pilot division because there's so much turnover in hospital medicine on a yearly basis. We've got probably about 20 to 30% of the hospitalists would be there for a year or two before proceeding on to a fellowship or some other kind of training. The need to recruit is significant on a yearly basis. And so we kind of changed the description on the website with the help of one of our marketing folks. And this was like a big deal. I mean, this was a significant time investment, financial investment that the department committed to. It takes resources to get this done. And then had a better kind of link on the job description about what is Ann Arbor like. If you've never been to Ann Arbor, it's kind of a small town. It's only about 150,000 people, and it's kind of in a rural-ish part of Michigan, so it's worth kind of understanding a little bit more of what Ann Arbor is like. And again, links to our commitments to DE&I on the description page. This is also, I think, a part of our recruitment process. So we've put a lot of effort into rethinking and casting a wide net, not just relying on these personal connections to find faculty, but really making this an active process to find candidates in, the circumstances that they exist. So again, using like the football connection, it's not like the University of Michigan just sits there and waits for, high school students to come to the door to join the football team. Harbaugh, love him or hate him, goes to the, high schools that these kids come from and actively seeks them out to recruit them. So we need to do the same thing in healthcare. And we want to identify pipelines beyond just like individuals, but how do we make connections at places to kind of have a continuous sense of what's going on at other institutions to understand, who might be somebody that we can recruit down the road. Thinking differently about people that we have had some interactions with in the past. So medical students that maybe were exceptional, but went to a different residency program. How can we kind of stay connected with those folks and maybe entice them back to Ann Arbor when they're done with whatever training they're seeking after medical school? And similarly for fellow applicants or even former faculty. I was a fellow at University of Michigan. I left for 10 years and practiced at UT Southwestern in Dallas and was lured back about 3.5 years ago by some of my former colleagues. We want to really emphasize the use of discipline-specific networks and annual scientific sessions. And we've tried to encourage people, like we just had the American College of Cardiology meeting not too long ago in March. We tried to encourage faculty to try to break out of even our own silos and seek out maybe some of the fellowship kind of case competitions or residence case competitions. We have a Midwest Women in Cardiology meeting coming up in June, where we've intentionally included a case competition for residents and fellows to both help invite them into the conversation, but also it gives a chance for our trainees to have a spotlight and kind of a better way to showcase who they are. And maybe there's a connection there that we can make in terms of ultimately recruiting faculty. And you have to think about this as a continuous process. I think this was also one of our experiences in the past had been to wait until there's an open faculty position. And then it's like a scramble, like, oh, who can we find to fill this open spot in rheumatology? This should be an ongoing process. There should always be feelers out there of who some exceptional candidates may be. And then again, kind of thinking differently about what connections we can leverage. In the American College of Cardiology, there's the Women in Cardiology section. For the interventional group, it's Women in Intervention. Tapping into the Student National Medical Association or American Medical Women's Association, AMWA. And then thinking about how to personalize recruitment for all these folks kind of coming through. We've had some really tough questions to kind of reflect on. Going back to those statements I said at the beginning, like, do we give all applicants and inquiries like similar weight? Do our colleague referrals, like kind of get into this, do colleague referrals receive an advantage? I think you could argue both sides of that coin, right? It is advantageous to have previous experience with someone so you know a little bit more of who you're going to get, if you will. But we shouldn't only rely on, colleague referrals to build your faculty. Does pedigree equate to success? You don't want to discount somebody from being successful, but I would argue that, if we only talk about recruits from Boston, you're going to get the same group of people recruited every single time. Oftentimes we talk about, and I know this is something in the residency and fellowship space, do you read the letters of recommendation before you meet the applicant or review their CV? Do you want to bias yourself based on what this other person has said? And then does success and objective metrics like scores on standardized tests, do they correlate? And I think the answer to that is clearly that doesn't seem to be the case. When we review the CVs, we always want to try to be very neutral when reviewing them, but it's not really possible to blind the reviewers to name, gender, or gender identity, et cetera. But an independent review of these CVs by more than one person can really help mitigate the bias that we may have and kind of look at different unique attributes that each applicant may have. And we should ask ourselves, what experiences are meaningful to us when looking for a colleague? Like for me, I really value someone who has a strong emphasis on being a team player. We need to be team players in the cath lab together. We work together a lot. We have lots of cases where we have 2 people scrubbed at the University of Michigan. So if you've got a lone wolf independent operator, that may be a little bit of a red flag for me. What experiences are valuable to us as an institution? Maybe there's a part of cardiology that we want to grow that we're deficient in, and that would be something that we really want to target. What experiences are important to the candidate? Thinking about it from their perspective. What do they want to hear from us when we're talking about recruitment? And we want to think more about strengths rather than deficiencies. So for example, we've had a number of candidates come through that were fantastic echo faculty. They might be deficient in one kind of set of requirements or reading, say like LVAD echoes or something like that. But instead of looking at that as a negative, how can we invest in that person to get them to like the right threshold that we need for University of Michigan because of all the other exceptional qualities that they bring to the table. The other kind of probably the most fundamental change in how we've been approaching recruitment is the use of a recruitment committee. And it looks a little bit different depending on the division, but essentially you want to have a group of people who reflect the diverse needs of the division. And we've incorporated fellows. The Department of Surgery does a great job of incorporating residents into faculty interviews. And it's helpful for two different reasons. Number one, it helps the faculty, the current faculty, hear from the trainees of what their perspective is on this individual, but also it gives the trainee an eye into what their own ultimate faculty recruitment is going to look like. So they kind of have a better sense of what to expect when it's their turn to go out and look for a job. Obviously, leadership needs to be included, but we also include staff. And I'll tell you, in the Division of Cardiology, our administrator, Betty Haas, is like our secret weapon when it comes to recruitment, that she often has the best kind of instant gauge on kind of how the person is behind the scenes, because it's amazing to me still how some people do not understand that we talk to our staff about, kind of their behavior on certain recruitment days. So have a diverse group of people. The recruitment committee has to have a meaningful role in the process. It can't just be for show. It can't just be that there's a committee, but then the division chief makes a decision on their own about what's going to happen. And that we want to have predefined roles for the committee members prior to even starting the first kind of interaction with the committee itself, in terms of, are they going to help select kind of the first pool of applicants? What's the time commitments? What are the expectations? And also we've made it mandatory that recruitment committee members have to have had some kind of unconscious bias training. And so at the University of Michigan, we have our own kind of bias training that we have to complete, but there's also the Harvard implicit bias test that you can do online. I don't know if any of you guys have ever taken that test. Have you ever taken it? I would really recommend you to take it. It's pretty quick. It's totally free online. It is eye-opening. So I'll say that this, I almost like hate to admit this because it's really embarrassing, but I did it once, maybe about 2014. I did the implicit bias test again for women, and I was like biased against women on this test. And I was like, what? Like, how am I biased against myself? I took it again not too long ago in about 2018, and I was actually more biased against women. And I'm like, how could this possibly be? So it's not to say I'm a bad person. Like, obviously I'm pro-woman, right? I'm not going to, it's like hard to reconcile those things, but it's worth at least taking the test to kind of see where you're at. So really, if you haven't done it before, take the time to do it. And there's lots of different kind of groups that you can test for, but it really is interesting. The recruitment committee should establish a process kind of before the first recruit is on campus or virtually kind of connected. Some people have used group interviews. Some people have relied on one-on-one interviews or a hybrid, and there's kind of advantages to both of those different approaches. The candidate should have space to introduce themselves. And we really want to use behavior-based questions, which I'll get to in a second. So this is kind of a group of questions. You can Google these. There's lots of different kind of question banks available online. Some of my favorite ones are, tell me about a time where you had conflict on a team and how did you handle that? That's a much more helpful question to ask somebody than, tell me about, one of your experiences in the cath lab. Like, I don't know, it's just that core value of teamwork is really helpful to ask about. Tell me about a time that you failed. The response to that question, I think, is also very enlightening. I mean, in the cath lab, negative things happen and you have to be able to deal with that. So how did that happen in the past for you? Thinking about complex situations and then explicitly asking people about their experience with DE&I. That's one of our core values at University of Michigan. We want to hear what people think. And we don't expect everyone to be these, experts in the space, but having some kind of action that they've taken to kind of demonstrate commitment to these values is important to us. The pluses and minuses of group versus individual interviews, sometimes with a larger group, you can have that concept of groupthink. Do you have unintentional bias? The individual interviews could also kind of kind of have bias included with them. So there's kind of pros and cons to both. We're still exploring like what's the best blend of these to use. I think surgery does it really well. They have like a group interview of about 4 or 5 faculty at lunch with a candidate, and then have separate one-on-one interviews later kind of in their interview day. Then thinking about candidate selection and ranking, it's meant to be an inclusive process. A unanimous decision is almost never possible, but you try to strive for consensus. Think about a standardized ranking system, and you want to follow the established guidelines that you've kind of made at the beginning of the process. And then once, an invitation to join faculty has been made, try to celebrate it. And I'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to kind of skip a couple of these slides just for the sake of time, because I want to leave some time for discussion. So I'll go into a little bit more detail of how this has been implemented in cardiology. As I said, hospital medicine was a little bit of our test kitchen, if you will. We learned some lessons from hospital medicine. And this past year, we've really tried to make a difference in cardiology. And I'll say that there is a palpable change in our division because of this. So a little bit of our data kind of, we're not too different than the national data. We only have 23% of our division are women. This is from 2021, but we haven't really made a big impact, unfortunately, as of yet. And we're also a pretty high percentage of white faculty. And so that's kind of where we're starting from. And hopefully we'll see that reflect more of the US kind of census data down the road. We're also pretty heavy in our tenured track, kind of instructional track faculty tend to be much more men compared to women. Women are much more kind of overrepresented on the clinical track. And so that's something that we're trying to change, to kind of recruit more tenured women scientists into the division. We also kind of did a rethink of the website that we use with actually, publishing all of our opportunities now. This is not something that used to happen in the past. On the side is kind of a description of our structural echo opportunity that was open not too long ago. And again, kind of included that DE&I language and kind of some of our core values on the very beginning of the application for people to see. We've used a few more of the methods of advertisement, especially some of the professional societies tried to leverage these. And we actually included a recruiter firm for the first time in this past year, just to kind of see what that process would look like. And it's actually been a little bit more promising than we had thought it was going to be in terms of accessing candidates. We, in the coming year, are going to be using a more comprehensive kind of fellowship listserv to keep track of our previous medical students, residents, and fellowship applicants. We've already kind of started using the social media platforms, but being a little bit more consistent across the board. We've asked for the Division of Cardiology to support from a both financial and administrative time standpoint, the ability to have like a very standardized template so that as soon as a position is open, we can kind of instantly get this published instead of having to like rewrite the job description every single time. And then we're trying to be a little bit more intentional about highlighting the accomplishments of faculty and fellows on our social media pages so that potential applicants can see a little bit more about who we are. In the past, they've really been dominated by like a handful of faculty, and that's not really representative of what Michigan looks like. Long-term, we want to engage kind of with pipeline programs, both from the undergraduate and even high school space. And then the American College of Cardiology has some really exceptional resident-based training kind of opportunities. And we're really trying to engage with them further to be included in that conversation. So this last year, general cardiology has really had a bumper crop, and if you can call faculty recruits that, of new faculty join. And I think a lot of the success is partially because of our section director for general cardiology and just the huge amount of time that he and kind of this core group of faculty have made on the process. We've tried to focus on people that really understand that Michigan is an academic practice. We value the tripartite mission of education and research and clinical practice. And if that kind of combination is not something that is what somebody may be looking for, then right off the bat, we'll just be honest with you about it. We don't want to waste people's time if we know it's not going to be a good match. We've also kind of tried to keep sort of ties on people who have had some experience in Ann Arbor, as I kind of mentioned before. The section director, as soon as an application comes in, will reach out to the candidate and engage with them almost immediately to kind of establish that rapport right off the bat. And then there's a small group of core faculty, which will kind of quickly virtually meet with the applicant. A lot of them are ECHO faculty to kind of connect and start the process of trying to determine if this person has a future at Michigan. From my own standpoint, interventional cardiology has also had kind of a different way of doing things this last year. And it's not only been good in terms of that we've been able to successfully recruit faculty from outside of Michigan, which hasn't happened in a while, but it also actually gave us an opportunity to reflect on who we were as a section and has really kind of changed the conversation about where we are, where we're going, et cetera. So there's been this interesting secondary consequence of going through this process, which I don't think any of us had imagined. So again, we had a very deliberate job description that was posted in journals, and we used Twitter. We had a mini committee of 4 of our faculty that were kind of the point people at the beginning. There's 10 interventional cardiologists at Michigan right now. And so 2 of those faculty would interview via phone the applicant. And then the 4 of us met after kind of we'd had an engagement with about 12 applicants and started thinking about who we thought held kind of satisfied some of those things that we were looking for from a skill set and a values perspective, and then invited those folks for a formal interview. And then after the interview process, also completely new this year, the entire interventional section met after having met with the applicants, and we had like a group ranking of the applicants. Like this never happened in the past. It was kind of like one person's decision behind a closed door. And it was great because I think we all really felt like we were included in the process. Everyone felt comfortable with who we were extending an invitation to. And the other great thing was we got feedback from the individual who will ultimately be joining us in August that said, I could really sense the time that Michigan put into this process. And they felt like, they got a much better sense of what Michigan was like and who we were, and that he could really see himself as, part of our faculty. And so that was actually really nice to hear. I think for some of my colleagues who are maybe a little bit more skeptical of the process, I think that self-reflection and then the realization from applicants that they're being invested in, I think was a happy consequence. Tracking all of our efforts is a little bit tricky. We talked about at the beginning, we try to ask some demographics questions at the beginning of the application. Those are obviously only voluntarily, you don't have to answer them, they're voluntary. But trying to keep track of who we're interviewing, where they're coming from, what their background is, et cetera, is important. There's a program called Interfolio that we're going to be rolling out this next year. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this program, but it helps kind of with some of this tracking. And then, on a yearly basis, we just reflect, we're kind of getting to the tail end here of the faculty recruitment season. So what have we done this past year? What has gone well? What do we need to improve on in the future? One other kind of interesting tidbit from the Ross School of Business is this idea of equity analytics. I have a feeling that we're going to be hearing a lot more about this down the road. One of the professors, Chris Ryder, has been kind of leading the conversation about thinking about how do we track our successes and what metrics are important to us. And so just for the sake of time, if you're interested, I would recommend Googling him. He's got his own website, and the University of Michigan webpage goes into some more detail about that as well. Here's a list of some resources. Again, reach out to me. I'm happy to share them. Some of them are only available on the University of Michigan intranet, but many of them are available externally. And, one of the ways that we usually end our Empower Council meetings is thinking about what can we do together, right? Like, what can we accomplish if we all work together in a systematic way to kind of rethink the processes of how we deal with our workforce? And maybe at the end, I'd ask you today, just think about as an individual and as a group, as a health system, what effort can you commit to in the next year to promote a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, healthy work environment? because I think it can be very overwhelming with all the things that we hear about, everything going on in society, that it can feel like a lot. But if you think about focusing on one kind of aspect of this, it really can make a difference and you can make an impact. So with that, I just say thank you very much for your attention. Really feel very honored to be here today. I'm like very thrilled, and I'd love to entertain some questions if people have any. And Mariam, wondering when does the University of Michigan have a student working part-time? I was recently told by another institution don't offer it, as women usually take the option to work part-time, but then end up working more. So then they're like paid to the amount of work is not equitable to a man who's working full-time. And then along with that, is there maternity leave and paternity leave? Because of course, if there's not paternity leave expected, then men can work while the women run off the pregnancy and then get. So are those things that are addressed in part of your plan, and do that sort of advertise as part of it? So in terms of the part-time, 100% we are flexible on working part-time. There's actually a number of faculty, especially with the pandemic and people's responsibilities maybe outside of work, whether it's like elder care or childcare. Frequently people go from full-time to like 80% time back up to full-time. It's very flexible. So there's no like hard and fast rule about it. I know of at least a couple of people even in our division that have done that in the last couple of years. So that's not been our conversation. Paternity and maternity leave are both part of the benefits of working at University of Michigan. I think paternity leave is like 6 weeks. So it's not the same amount as maternity leave, but I think it's 6 weeks. I don't know. I feel badly. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but absolutely it's standard. And that includes our house officers. Our house officers, residents and fellows are unionized, and that's part of their union contract. And it's very much respected. It's not like, you have to be checking your Epic or, EMR in basket or email, you're out. You're not working. And similarly, there's a lot of conversation going on about, promotion for people who have had to take time off, whether it's to have a child or, whether, like I mentioned, elder care. A lot of people have had challenges with taking care of like elderly parents and having that. And so we're trying to figure out what is the most equitable way, to think about promotion for folks who are, really living their lives. We need to just start thinking of taking care of your family in whatever that means for you as like a part of your career and not just something that may or may not happen. So it sounds like it's a little different, but I love the idea about advertising the maternity and paternity. We haven't done that specifically, but I think that's worthwhile. University of Texas, when I was down in Dallas, was very different. You could have maternity leave, but it was your vacation time. So yeah, that's not the case at Michigan. So I think of it two ways. I'm glad that our fellows want to stay, but I also think we're missing out on external candidates. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. From a why do fellows want to stay? I think that we have a lot of resources available for junior faculty who want an academic career, especially some really great mentors, especially on the kind of research side of things. There's a lot of clinical opportunity for folks. And so I also think generally our faculty and our fellows get along pretty well. And so I think that relationship, our fellows can see themselves as a faculty member pretty easily. But I do worry, with so many people coming from internal environment, I worry we're a little bit inbred. So, right now, there's only a couple out of the 10 interventional cardiologists, most people trained at University of Michigan. I'm like this anomaly because I went to Texas for 10 years and I kind of developed a little bit of a different way of doing things. And so when I came back to Michigan, it was like, oh, like Sarah wants to do it this way. And it was like this really weird thing. So maybe you're a little bit too homogeneous, right? If we have too many people coming from the inside, but so yeah, so I'm glad that there's a lot of folks that want to stay, but I wish we could, bring in some new blood from time to time.
Hospital is kind of like your testing lab or.
It was the pilot, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the pilot in hospital medicine happened right as the pandemic was starting. And so I think we've struggled with how to blend a virtual and an in-person kind of style. And I think especially then it was very hard to bring faculty to interview in Ann Arbor. And I think we probably lost out on some of the folks that may otherwise would have explored the opportunity to come if we had offered a more kind of hybrid virtual and in-person type of program. And I think adapting that experience, like I said, in cardiology, at least, we have most of our first touches, if you will, with faculty applicants that are virtual now and kind of go through that initial, question with that smaller group of people in that way. And so I think you're able to rapidly make a connection, which I think is important, and not have it wait until the person, comes to campus, but also be able to understand, like, if the person's career goals are not what Michigan, would provide them, then you can quickly say, yeah, this is great meeting you. No, thanks. Who knows, maybe down the road, this may be a better fit, so yeah. So I think that we kind of struggled a little bit with that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. And every group is a little bit different. So I've highlighted cardiology because it's obviously what I'm most familiar with. Hospital medicine is a little bit different blend, I think, of faculty and staff than we are. So each group has been different. Sometimes I think the Department of Surgery has done a better job at inviting other groups in. There's a really interesting connection between the Department of Surgery and the Department of Education that they have there. And so some of it's related to some of the research work on kind of teaching in the OR and having like psychological safety during surgery. And so they're pretty connected with education. So there's been a little bit more of that, but we haven't, for example, intentionally included, say, some of our partners like pulmonary critical care, in the cardiology division selection process with the committee. But obviously if people have, say, overlapping interests, they'll, connect with the candidates outside of that. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. This is relatively new, so there hasn't been a lot of turnover in the groups that I'm familiar with. Our council has had some turnover in the about 3 years that we've been meeting. And so we've had some new members join with some really excellent ideas. But for the recruitment committees, I think it's been the same group for the last, year or two. Cardiology, it's been the same. Well, I'd say maybe on the echo side, we've added a couple more faculty because of their interest and honestly their kind of breadth of perspective. And this was just the first year that we did this on an interventional side. So we'll see what next year looks like. But it was a determined committee prior to anything happening. So this was the core group that was maintained over the whole recruitment season. Yeah. Yeah. I think, to me, I think it's the seeking out these candidates in other formats. Like I can think of the Women in Cardiology program that is like the Midwest program that I mentioned. I've met two exceptional female cardiology fellows who want to apply to our interventional program because of a connection I made there. And so I don't know if there's an opportunity to engage with like medical students at, say, like a case competition or something. I think it's really just that hard work of like boots on the ground, somehow meeting people. And so I don't know, does the medical school have some like research symposium or case competition that I would say, meet those candidates where they're at, and maybe, by making that initial connection, that could be better. There's a lot of, and I don't know if ACP, I'm sure ACP has some other kind of, competition like that. And so I think that's where you have the opportunity to engage and then broadcast it, Again, I hate to sound like a broken record with Twitter, but like, it really is amazing what you see on Twitter and the connections that people can make. And so if you, go, oh, I just saw this really outstanding presentation on hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, take a picture, tag, and then people know that you're interested in hearing what residents and fellows are doing, what they're saying, someone else say, hey, that's my friend, and it's just kind of an organic way of building connections. But I think that's the key. I think meeting people where they're at and showing them who you are. And it's not just like a sterile, the website is a little bit better, but it's still a sterile website, right? It's not that human connection. Mm. Yeah, please do. I've been surprised at how, it really, it's the good part of Twitter. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.